I'm Sandra Murray Schultz, known as Sandy, born in Wheeling, West Virginia, at the Ohio Valley Hospital. Although I never lived in West Virginia, we lived in Ohio across the river, and my mother's doctor, Dr. Thompson, took her to that nearest hospital.
And what memories do you have of your childhood? What are the things that stand out the most to you from your early childhood?
Well, when I lived in Steubenville, just almost at the corner of Stanton Boulevard, where the Fort Steuben Bridge crossed to West Virginia. We lived right there. We had a huge snow one winter, and all the children in the neighborhood came to our big corner lot and dug tunnels. They were way over, the banks were way over my head, but that has stuck with me forever and ever. And I have fond memories of Jerry Graham, with whom I tap danced, and I had a teenage friend who taught me to blow grass. And when I was in third grade, we moved to Bloomingdale, Ohio, where I spent most of my childhood. All I can say about my childhood is that it was a very happy one. Always comfortable and joyful and good fun, good play. We played outdoors all summer long. We had a playhouse up behind my house that we used to imagine all sorts of wonderful things. Gypsies were chasing us in our horse-drawn covered wagon. My cousin Gary was always great fun, and he built a whole entire village back in the woods near his house, out of sticks, and I think was like a straw bale roof with paths and all sorts of fun things. We went to the lake, Austin Lake, quite a bit, swimming in the summertime. I have memories of going to school. Well, when I was still in Steubenville, I went to James A. Garfield Elementary School, and in kindergarten, my teacher, Mrs. Ham, made me sit up front on the little chairs where we went for a reading class because I tended to sit on my feet, and she didn't like that. Margaret O'Brien was my first grade teacher, and she chose me to be the May Queen. So I think I was chosen because I happened to have a long white dress because I had been a flower girl in a friend's wedding. But then when I moved to Bloomingdale, I met Joyce, my best friend, all through school, from third grade on. She died about 5 years ago now, I think. But we had great times, and we used to chase poor Bill around the schoolyard. He was very shy. We picked on him a little bit.
Who was Bill?
Bill Simmons. I reacquainted with him really at our 50th class reunion, and we've been emailing back and forth ever since, and he is the most interesting person. He has been a high school counselor, and then after retiring from that job, he worked for the Jefferson County Technical School doing adult ed classes. He's a tree farmer and a beagle dog owner, and I know he's had a fondness for horses as well, because I remember he came to Cleveland once for the polo matches out in, is it Chagrin Falls or near there? Mm-hmm. The polo field. But Bill is a wonderful historian, so he fills me in all on all the things that are happening around Bloomingdale, Ohio, and he's a very interesting guy. He recently put me on to an author that he has liked over the years, Louis Bromfield, and I've been reading some of Louis Bromfield's books. He grew up in Mansfield, Ohio, which is in the general, mid-Ohio vicinity, and he lived in France for quite a while, but then moved back to Ohio and bought the Malabar Farm, and he has developed and perfected farming procedures. It's quite a show place, I guess. It's near Mansfield.
What do you remember about or introduce your parents for me, and what do you remember about them? What type of people were they?
My father, I'm getting hoarse, was Earl
Want some
Edwin.
water?
Maybe. Should I wait?
Go ahead. Keep going.
My father, Earl Edwin Murray, was a very personable man, very well liked. He grew up very near where I'm referring to. He grew up in Dillonvale, Ohio, I think, but they moved to Smithfield, also in Jefferson County. And he married my mother when she, just 4 days after she was 21, after she turned 21. My mother wore a blue velvet suit and a picture hat for her wedding. They were married in her father's living room. My mother is Marjorie Mansfield Murray. She lost her mother when she was just a young girl, so she was very close with her sister. It was Marjorie Jean and Virginia Irene, both the village queens. Well, what more?
How about the rest of your family? How about Judy?
I have one sister, Judith Murray Newburn. We had a brother, but he died in infancy. He was between the two of us. So there are 4.5 years between myself and Judy. Judy stayed in Jefferson County, Ohio, for most of her married life, and then she and her husband decided they were going to try something new, and they moved to North Carolina and lived just outside of Charlotte. And they loved it, and they met new people and did new things, and it was quite an adventure for them. And then later Bob wanted to live closer to the mountains, so they moved to Mount Airy, North Carolina, and lived there. Everywhere they go, they make a wonderful home. They are very talented at building and decorating and remodeling. So just last year, they decided they were going to come back to Ohio to be near their daughter, Michelle. And they also decided they were going to get a little place in Florida to spend some winter months. So that's what they're doing now. They spent their first winter months in Florida this past winter of 2018. And now they're back in Ohio, and I'm going to visit them this week, and we're going to pick up on our old tradition of visiting the graves for Memorial Day and taking red geraniums to our grandparents' graves and a pink geranium for my father's infant sister who died in infancy, and a blue ageratum for our brother.
What happened to your brother?
He had pyloric stenosis, I think it is. He couldn't keep any food down. And now I believe they can fix it.
And what do you remember about your grandparents?
I was very close to my Murray grandparents. I spent one summer with them when they lived on the Foster Farm in Smithfield, where my grandfather watched the Grant racehorses during the off season. They came and were boarded there at their farm when they weren't racing, and I spent a lot of time with them there. My grandmother and I used to sit for hours and play the piano. Actually, anything I wanted to do, my grandmother was ready to do. But we spent just comfortable time together, you know, whether it was picking tomatoes in the garden, canning, just sitting at the piano or whatever. She was a very quiet and very loving grandmother. We did a lot of rocking in the rocker. My grandfather worked for Grant Albert for a time. He must have been hauling slag at that time. He drove a truck. And at one point in his life, I think he worked at a coal tipple, and at one point he drove a steel truck. But he was a laborer. He never ever failed to come home and go into the bathroom and strip down and put on his white shirt before dinner.
So,
Oh,
do
my-
you know, oh, go ahead.
I forgot. My Mansfield grandmother died, as I told you, when my mother was very young. She died of meningitis. And so my mother and her sister were motherless for a time, and then my grandfather Mansfield did marry Mildred, who had a daughter. And I think there was a little bit of rivalry there. But my grandfather Mansfield had a confectionery. I have a picture of them. He and my two uncles, for some reason, are standing in front of his confectionery in Bloomingdale, Ohio, where he made ice cream. And apparently there was a pool room upstairs. But my whole family lived in that area. You know, that's just where they hailed from many years ago. In fact, the Mansfields were some of the first white settlers in Jefferson County, others being Native Americans. But they were, in the 1920 census, they were called gentleman farmers, whatever that designation was.
Do you know how they ended up in Ohio?
No, I've done genealogy research. I don't carry it all in my head. I think they came from England, Great Britain, England, but I think may have come to Maryland first, and then I don't know how they migrated to Ohio. No, I don't. No.
So Bloomingdale is where you spent most of your bulk of your childhood.
Yes.
How would you describe yourself as a teenager and describe? I know you had some exploits in terms of your academic successes in high school.
Have I told you that?
Well, you're valedictorian, right?
Oh, I co-valedictorian.
Right. Yeah.
Bill Simmons, whom I
Oh,
referenced earlier, was salutatorian. He took all the hard classes. Maxine and I took the easier classes and ended up on top. There were 44 in our class. But I was very active in school, a little shy but popular. I was in the band. We had both a marching and a symphonic band. We didn't have an orchestra.
What did you play?
Clarinet. My dad played clarinet and saxophone in high school, and also in the Army Air Corps band that when they were stationed in New Jersey when I was an infant. That's a whole other line of thought.
Some of it.
But, well, I better stick with my school.
Okay, go ahead.
I was a cheerleader. I was in a senior play.
What was the play?
I don't remember.
Huh?
I think I still have the playbook in my attic, but I don't remember the name of the play.
You play any sports?
No. We didn't have girl sports,
Mm-hmm.
really. No, cheerleading was my sport and marching band.
Bill wasn't your boyfriend though in high school?
No.
Mm-hmm.
No, I had a boyfriend. He became a doctor.
Where?
He was one of our successful students. Well, he's a cancer research doctor. And he's currently, I think, in, well, he's been around. Texas, I believe, is where he is right now, near Austin.
Okay, so you finished up your senior year in high school, and then what's
Yeah.
next?
Well, my principal, Mr. Maffeo, said, Sandy, I think you ought to consider going to college. He said, I went to Ohio University and I recommend it. I said, oh, Mr. Maffeo, that's too many years. Well, Sandy, you've got to do something. So I said, well, I want to be a secretary and move to New York. Well, you probably need some training. So my father, I guess, was talking with his brother, Uncle Moyne, who, along with Aunt Ruth, lived in Mentor, Ohio, and Uncle Moyne suggested Dyke College of Business in Cleveland. So we visited and we signed me up. So I went there for 2 years.
Was that scary, the idea of going to Cleveland for Bloomingdale?
No,
Or were
I
you
was
excited about it?
okay. I was okay. I lived with a family initially because Dyke is a small, local community type of college, although they later became Myers College, and now they're out of business. After many years, I mean, John D. Rockefeller went to Dyke College. Yeah, he did. But they didn't have a dorm, so we arranged that I would be a live-in babysitter for the Marshalls on Stratford Road. Great big house. They had just moved into it, and they had 4 children. It was very easy, not a big deal. Then my second year, I wanted to be a little more independent, so I moved to Cogswell Hall on the west side on Franklin Boulevard, where I met Ginny, and we became good friends.
What year was that you came to Cleveland? Do you remember around when?
60.
In 60.
Mm-hmm.
So
I
what
was still
Cleveland-
17.
What was Cleveland like in 1960?
Well, it was
What
great.
was Cleveland Heights like? Like it must have been a different place.
Fairmount Boulevard and Stratford Road look very much the same now as they did then. I would take the bus, down to school and back. Cleveland was always windy. When I remember a time or two trying to get to the Greyhound bus station to go home to Bloomingdale, and the wind would be, I'd be dragging my suitcase and the wind would be pushing me back this way. But that's how I usually got home. One time I did get a ride with a friend whom I met at Dyke, who lived in Mingo near Steubenville.
Okay, so you're at Dyke, and how does that progress, and what comes next?
I completed my 2-year course in medical secretarial work. I got an associate degree. And my counselor wanted me to go for an interview at the Cleveland Clinic. And I said, I don't know. I think I'll just go home to Bloomingdale and get a job. She said, well, just go. It'll be good practice for you to have the interview. So I went, I had my gloves and my little gray suit. And I don't think I wore the pink hat, but I might have. And had an interview, and they offered me a job in the secretarial pool. And I just didn't know how to say no, so I just took the job. And I've been here ever since.
And so you settle in as a secretary at the clinic, and what's life?
Yeah.
How does life progress from there?
Some good years, very good years. I was in the secretarial pool for a while, and then Dr. Hudson came up looking for a new secretary. He'd transferred from university hospitals to the Cleveland Clinic at a time in his life when he was taking on a role with the AMA as their president, and he thought his patients could be better covered in his absences as he traveled around. So he was fairly new, and I was fairly new. And he came up to the secretarial pool and interviewed me and asked me how old I was, and I told him I was 19. He said, "Oh, you're young enough to be my daughter." Well, which was true. But we worked well together, and he was very kind. When he was being inaugurated as the AMA president in Chicago, he invited me to come, and I stayed with his daughters, Mary and Judy, in the hotel, and we went to the luncheons and all the fancy events. It was great fun. I worked.
I became friends with his grandson.
Oh, yes.
So coincidentally.
Yes,
That's funny.
true.
Yeah, I grew up across the street from
Yeah,
him.
that's right.
Charlie,
That's
right?
yes,
Like the son.
yes, right. Married.
Okay. So
But during this period of time, Ginny and I were ready to set out, leave Cogswell Hall, where we had just a bedroom. You know, it was a residence hall for unmarried women. We called it a home for bad girls, but it really wasn't. There were a lot of dyke girls there at this time, as well as older women who, were working women. So I was talking in the cafeteria to my new friends Joyce and Millie about looking for a new place. And they said, "Oh, well, one of our roommates is getting married. Why don't you come and live with us?" I said, "Well, I've already promised Ginny, that we'll look for a place together." And they said, "Well, bring her along. We have lots of room at 2510 Euclid Heights Boulevard." So Ginny and I moved in and had just wonderful times with those girls. None of us had a car, so if we had laundry to do, we'd either call a cab or get on a bus with our laundry basket and go up to Coventry and throw our clothes in the washer and then go over to Irv's for some matzo ball soup. And I've, retained their friendships over the many years since. Diana lives here in Cleveland. Millie lives in Dunkirk. Joyce, second Joyce, died recently. Well, what it's been, 2 years, maybe. So we lost her. And Ginny has moved farther away. She's up near, somewhere in Pennsylvania. She's remarried for a second time. Her second husband died and she remarried, and they moved and are making wine of some sort, but I have lost touch with her. And during this time, too, I became friends with Dr. Proudfit, who was head of cardiology at the clinic, and he'd come in and sit down and we'd chat because we were on the same floor at the clinic. And somehow or other we were talking about needing to scrub our rug, and he said, "I have a rug scrubber. I'm going to send my son John over to bring it to you girls." And along with John came Walt and Chuck. So the three of Walt, John, and Chuck, we all became good friends and hung out. And, well, I later dated John and married Walt.
What was wrong with John? Why didn't it work out with John?
John was Dr. Proudfoot's son.
Right.
And nothing really happened other than he got this fancy sports car that he cared more about than anything. And I don't know, maybe we were just tired of each other. We stayed friends. And gosh, we used to be in a card club together with them and some other people, Walt and I. And John was in our wedding. I think he was the best man.
And so how did things progress with Walt from just dating to what was the progression like?
Oh, well.
What was that like early on?
Dating was really special back in those days, We'd put on our dress-up clothes and go down to the Palace Theater, which was a movie theater at that time. We went to local places as well. The Brick Cottage. Well, I don't know if Walt went to the Brick Cottage so much. He was in, let me see. He was in school at George Washington University for part of this time. And then later he came and finished his college work at Case Western Reserve University, where he also worked in the room that had all the bank of early computers with all the cards spitting in and out. We dated for quite a while. He went off to the Army. Well, I guess that's when we started dating. He went for summer, what do you call it when you go off with the Army Reserves?
It was like
Training summer
sometime.
camp.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going on my first airplane ride to Erie, Pennsylvania with Ginny and Millie, I think. And we met Walt coming off the plane in his uniform at the airport. And he just bowled me over in his uniform, straight back, you know how he is. And we just started dating after that.
Okay, so what was, when did he propose? What was the proposal?
Well, it was probably 2 years later. We had kind of talked a little bit about it, driving back from Diane and Pete's wedding, I remember. And we might have looked at rings in the window of Calvin Hubbard a time or two. But other than that, he just kind of popped it. We were going out to dinner. I had on a pretty deep red dress with long sleeves. And we were going to the Green Turtle restaurant. It's now something else, a Mexican restaurant of some sort. And he just proposed and gave me a ring. It was a perfect quarter carat. Perfect. Single carat, single stone. Very nice. So we called my folks and said we had some news and could we meet them. And we arranged to meet them, what is that called? The Aurora, not the Aurora Inn, some other inn. Where they had a...
in Aurora, because it was kind of like in between?
Well, it was near Aurora. I can't remember the name of it, but it had one of those big machines that played the metal discs. What were those called?
Sure.
Well, Walt would know.
All right, well, we'll get to him. We'll get his version tomorrow. I think, so.
And so we all arrive, and they said, "Don't tell us you're married." So that was kind of a letdown. Well, no, we're not married. We're engaged. So
Where'd you get married?
we were married in Bloomingdale, Ohio, in the Methodist Church where we were members. We had a reception at the Caddis Country Club. It was a very modest reception. We had fruit punch, although Pete and Jim managed to find the bar. And I think we had maybe 99 people there, or something like that. Several people from, well, Walt's family, of course, came. And
Traditional wedding parties with bridesmaids and everything?
mm-hmm. Well, I had Millie, Judy, and Ginny, I believe, were in my wedding party, and John, Chuck, and Ernie were the groomsmen.
Okay, and then how much longer till you started a family? What was that process like?
Oh, Lord. Well, it was about 3 years later. I remember being at work, and suddenly it dawned on me, and I called Walt at work, and I said, Walt, I'm going to be 27. We better have a baby. So he said, oh, okay. Maybe not quite like that. So we did.
Why did it catch you by surprise? Wasn't that part of the plan? Like, what?
No, we
hadn't
just
talked
never
about it?
talked about it. We just were busy with our going to work and whatever, our daily routine.
Okay, so after then you how long till? Who came along first?
Emily, we had to do a bit of work with the doctor to actually make it happen, but it
What was
happened.
like that? What was that like in the early '60s? What would you do to facilitate it? with the
Well,
doctor?
nothing very dramatic, but we were both tested and looked okay, and I don't want to get too involved in that.
Okay. I'm just guessing if the fertility discussion was different in the '60s than it is now,
Oh,
right?
I'm sure. I mean, there weren't certainly all those options. It just we were fortunate enough that a little tube clearing out and everything was fine.
When did you realize you were pregnant? What was that day like? Or was it a day, or did
I
you just
don't-
sort of get a? Do you remember telling Walter I'm pregnant? Like, do you remember telling?
No,
No.
I don't really remember.
All right. And what was Emily like?
Oh, cute as can be. A little fuzzy-haired baby. It's perfect.
And then what was next after that? Where did you guys settle? What, did you buy a house?
Oh, we still lived in our the upstairs of a large house on Liberty Road in South Euclid. Di found it for us. She and Pete lived across the street in a little house owned by Elsie Slater, and they owned this house too. And we lived upstairs. It was a nice, roomy apartment, and it had 2 bedrooms. So we set up one with a nursery. I painted it a lovely, soft, seafoamy blue-green, and I had a lace curtain that we got in England. I was 5 months pregnant when we took a notion to take advantage of a package trip, airfare and a car and select hotels and some meals, all in this package deal. And we went to England and Scotland and Wales.
That's exciting.
It was wonderful. It was just wonderful. We were in London. We saw some plays. I had my most favorite dessert in London at the Post Office Tower restaurant, which was a revolving restaurant. And it was fresh strawberries with clotted cream. It was really delicious. We were in Scotland. We went to Loch Lomond, and I felt, and Edinburgh. We visited St. Giles Presbyterian Church, which is the home of Presbyterianism, and drove around. The Cotswolds were beautiful. We were on the White Cliffs of Dover. It was just a wonderful trip. I loved it. I always sort of felt I was meant to live on that side of the ocean.
What do you mean?
I don't know. It just
disposition fits you. What do you mean?
Yeah, and even this recent trip to Italy and Switzerland, I don't know. I just feel more myself in the old world as opposed to the new world. Somehow.
So did you buy a house?
Oh, yes. When Emily was about 8 months old, I believe. We looked and looked. We must have looked at, 50 houses. Originally, we were looking in South Euclid, but just didn't find anything that we really liked. And so our realtor said, well, I want to show you a house over here on Quilliams. And in Cleveland Heights, and we liked it, and we bought it. It was a nice 2-story colonial with a stone front on the lower half, and an attached single garage, 3 bedrooms. And we lived there for a very long time.
Did you stop working at that point?
Yes, I stopped working about a week before Emily was born. Yes, actually it was. She was born on the 10th of October. I stopped working on September 30th, so 10 days.
And at this point, were you already members of Forest Hill? When did you join Forest Hill?
Oh, yes. Walt grew up at Forest Hill Church. He and his mother walked with the congregation from the old building to the new. And so he'd been a lifelong member there, and I was a Methodist in my youth, and when I first came to Cleveland, I did go to the Methodist Church on Lee Road fairly often when I lived on Stratford. Church of the Savior Methodist. I liked their pastor, Charlie Brown. He was funny. But I also was very fond of Yoder Leith at Forest Hill, and when Emily was born, I joined there, and we had her baptized.
Was that the young sort of the younger minister that there was a lot of drama with at Forest Hill?
No, that came later in maybe
70s.
Perhaps. We were married in 1967. I don't know, but Ned Edwards came as the associate pastor, and he was very involved in social activism, and a lot of the congregation weren't quite sure about all that, and they did lose some membership, but over the years, he acquired quite a following, and we have come to be a very progressive, socially conscious church in this community and beyond. Ned became the senior pastor, and following him now for 20-some years, John Lentz is a very passionate activist in well-loved in Cleveland Heights.
Would you say that you've evolved in that a little bit?
Oh,
too?
very
Like
much.
you go to a small town. Like, do you feel
Very
like
much.
You've been impacted, living on the east side of Cleveland?
Yeah. I always sort of, in reflecting, thought that we were very provincial. in Bloomingdale. And the outside world was just something beyond. And my parents were not very political. So we didn't have much of a discussion about any of that. So in joining Forest Hill and participating in adult education and other opportunities, and just listening to our pastors preach, I got an awareness of the greater world and a real passion for social issues.
You weren't a hippie, though.
No, far from, no, not at all. Although I was very committed to the peacemaking effort along about, was it, I'm not good with dates, but we had a man from the Western Reserve Presbytery come and preach. His name was Richard Watts, and he had fostered an organization called Swords into Plowshares, and brought to my awareness the fact that we had this enormous nuclear arsenal, and competition with the Soviet Union, and it scared me to death. I think I had Caroline, baby girl Caroline, at that point. So I became active at Forest Hill Church in the peacemaking task force, and I wrote tons of letters and did marches.
You're known for your letter writing.
Well, I was then. I'm not so much now.
Plain dealer too, right? You've been
Oh
published
yes,
many times.
I have. I had one great letter that was published in the Plain Dealer. I don't know what happened to it, but I remember one man objected to my use of the word pacify. I don't know, something that he did. I was using it to have a different meaning than what he was suggesting.
He was nitpicking your letter?
He was, yeah. Okay. He liked to nitpick.
Oh. Okay, so you, how long after Emily was Becky, and then what do you remember about young Becky?
Becky was born in 73, Emily in 70, 10-10-70, and Becky in 73. And I decided to have natural childbirth with Becky. And I'm sure we went to Lamaze classes, though, for Emily, too, but I ended up having a spinal headache. At any rate, I was going to go natural with Becky. And I did. And it was my best delivery, somehow or other. Everything went well. I remember, though, when Dr. Bowman said, "It's a girl," I said, "Oh, but we have one of those." But I'll tell you right now that I think having 3 girls is the most wonderful thing.
Why is that? Take a drink of water if you want. It's afternoon. We can,
I don't know what makes it so special.
You talking about their relationship that you like?
I think they have a good relationship, which makes me very happy, and I just couldn't have been happier.
Caroline there was a pretty big gap between Caroline and Emily.
Yes.
What was the story there?
Well, some of this is personal,
Okay.
But I had a miscarriage. I hadn't planned to have another baby. It just happened, and then after that, I couldn't forget it. And I said to Walt, I think we should have another baby. And he was a little hesitant because, more babies, more expense, and all of that. But I think Caroline was conceived in Canada.
The timing works out. You did the
Yes,
math.
I
Yeah.
think so. And I felt so well, even though I was 30. How old was I, Caroline?
38 maybe?
Something like that. But I really felt so well and so energetic through that pregnancy. It was really my best pregnancy, and everything went very well. And we had our little bundle of joy.
You mentioned Canada. I mean, that was a probably important. When did that sort of, that ritual come into play?
I think we must have.
Like it's Pete's family. Like, how did
Oh. Well, my roommate Diana married Pete Selliver, whose family had in their family a cottage on an island in Blackstone Lake in Ontario, Canada, for many years. Their first original cottage burnt down, but they built another, smaller but efficient and nice. And Walden. I don't think Becky was born. Walt and Emily and I went up because I seem to remember Emily being pretty young in the copper tub where we used to bathe the babies. And we always thought we would, want to travel around to many places on our summer vacations to introduce the girls to different parts of the country. But we loved it so that we went up many, many summers to Blackstone Lake, and the kids loved it. They just loved it. Once in a while, we would take a friend along. My mom and dad came up 2 or 3 times. Judy and Bob were there at least once with their children, Brian and Michelle. And we were there once with Jenny and Danny Behrens and their kids. So, but mostly we were there, just our family. And it's so relaxing, and the air is so fresh and crisp, and bathe in the water, brush your teeth at the lake, pump your water at the sink, and use the propane lights and the coal stove or wood burning stove.
And we've had some large groups up there now. Like, I mean, we're trying to keep it
well,
going,
it
but
seems
too big, but,
it seems that not only did Walt and I and the girls love it, but all the spouses as well. And we've had the whole family up there for many wonderful vacations, as well as some lovely vacations in Michigan and one in the Outer Banks. Duck.
Mm-hmm.
That was before Brian, wasn't it?
Duck was before Brian.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. So we only had Emily at that time. Grace. Grace had her 6-month birthday
Yes, that
at
sounds
Duck.
familiar. That's
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so you've got your 3 girls, and
8 grandchildren.
and 8 grandchildren. They're all going to Oxford and through the Heights schools. Did you guys always want to stay in Cleveland Heights, or did you ever think about changing locations?
Well, um, I didn't work for 14 years, I think. So we were, limited to one income, middle management income. We had a good neighborhood, lots of good neighbors, children running and playing and having fun in the neighborhood. Then our neighbors started moving to get bigger houses. And we had entertained the thought because we had friends on this side of town. What side of town is this? Where you live?
The south side.
The south side of town.
Sue and Chuck moved over here.
Sue and Chuck were here, and I almost wish that we had. I mean, they spent $3,000 more than we did for our house at that time. Our house was $27,000. Theirs was $30,000. And Walt had grown up over here, but when we bought our house on Quilliams, I was not really that familiar with the different parts of town. And
even though you worked over here. Even though you lived over here on Stratford.
Oh, I did, yeah. But yeah.
On Euclid Heights Boulevard too.
You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. But I didn't know the city that well.
You
know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
So I had mentioned to him once, but it didn't happen. We did discuss a move when he was offered a transfer. I think he was working at Bobby Brooks when they offered to transfer him to Philadelphia. And we thought about it, but decided it was just too expensive to live over there. So we didn't do it.
Okay. You don't have to get into the details, but you guys separated at this point, right?
We did. Well, yeah.
Around then.
Caroline was 11.
11. Okay. And then you moved to Cambridge after that, or you lived in an apartment on.
I had an
Winthrop?
apartment
And then you moved to Cambridge.
on Noble Road, Noble and Quilliams. Great little apartment with wonderful sunsets that just filled the living room with beautiful light. But I decided that I needed to try to make a move. I was giving them too much money and not having anything to show for it. So I started looking around and found a place in the same neighborhood on Cambridge. Lived there for 24 years now.
And you went back to work. Were you working for the Forest Hill Homeowners Association? Was that?
I did for a time. That was a very part-time job. My old boss, Dr. Hudson, called me up and said, "I'm president of the Forest Hill Homeowners Association. I need some work. I need some help." So I would go over and run their addressograph machine, print out their newsletters, and do different little odd jobs for them.
And then you got a job with the school district?
And then I started working as a substitute secretary for the Cleveland Heights, University Heights Board of Education about the time Caroline started kindergarten. And I liked the job because I had flexibility. I didn't have to take a job on any given day, and I was connected to the girls in their school, and I could get home quickly if I needed to. And we had a next-door neighbor whose daughter was Caroline's best friend, as a little kindergartner, and she watched her after school till I got home. I think gave her lunch too, because at that time the kids walked home for lunch.
And then some of your friends in adulthood you met through the district. Is that how you met, like the Caiuses and the Dietrichs and the other people you've become friends with since? Chris Holly. How did those friendships start?
Well, I knew Chris Henry from church, and there was a point in time when she and Karen and Janie and I were single again. And so we started doing things as a little group. And I eventually joined Chris Henry's book group, which I've been in now for, oh gosh, I can't even say how long, a long time, but met some dear friends, Jan and Nancy and Karen and Chris, and we've added Sue and Toddy, and kind of evolved. Well, I'll tell you about that in a minute. Chris Holly Starling and I have known each other for many years because her daughter Jenny and Becky were good friends from middle school all through high school and remain good friends to this day. Jenny and her husband and daughter live in Switzerland. And it was when they were visiting Jenny in Switzerland that Brian and Becky became engaged. How did Chris and I... She lost her husband, and somehow we got to talking again and started doing things together. She's quite an active person, and we went to plays and concerts and museums and all sorts of things. And then I finally got to travel with her to Europe, to Switzerland, and all through Italy, a wonderful trip. Jan last year turned 70 and gave herself a party and invited 30 of her closest friends to her croning. And we had such a wonderful time that Jan said, let's start getting together. So every Thursday, we've been getting together for 2 hours to just enjoy each other's company and have conversation. Sometimes we have a specific thing we talk about, such as favorite books. One woman has walked the Cinque Terre. No, that's not what it's called. Not.
Oh, no, you're talking about...
the Way of
in
St.
Spain,
James.
or,
Yeah, in Spain. What's it called? And she did a lecture on that for us one time. We have many, they're wonderful, intelligent, talented people, so they're terribly interesting to be with, and I've enjoyed it very much, being a crone. A wise woman.
And now you're a 5-star Airbnb host.
Oh dear. Well, I'm retired from that profession. I did run Jan's Airbnb during an extended trip to South Africa. She and her husband took, in which they incorporated Dubai and Australia and New Zealand. It was just a fantastic trip. They were gone for almost 2 months, I think.
I was told once that you were not very happy about Caroline moving to Chicago. Does this ring a bell? And what were you worried about with?
I don't think you want to go
choice?
into that.
Well, what do you remember from Caroline's early adulthood?
Well, it wasn't anything specific to Caroline. It's more the way I grew up.
Mm-hmm.
And times are different. But I'm very happy.
I was gonna say, are you surprised that things have worked out for your kids? Like when you look at
you
their
have
families.
no idea how happy and grateful I am. I loved my visits to Chicago, and love those babies. When Becky lived in California for a time, and oh, it was just wonderful to visit. Kara, you went. I had never planned to get to California for some reason, but boy, I did enjoy it tremendously. My sister and I went once, and we had a great time. I flew out and drove back with Becky when she decided to come back to Ohio, and we had a great adventure crossing the country in her little red Honda, packed to the gills. We went through the mountains. We camped overnight one night and got so cold we never did it again. But yeah, enjoyed it all.
Grandkids are mostly good kids, it seems like, right? You got
Yes.
Grace is about ready to be an adult.
Oh my, yes. 17.
Seems like you get to spend some quality time with Grace and Soph. What's that relationship like?
Oh, I enjoy them very much, and I'm proud of them and their accomplishments. Grace, is a very unique little person. She's an artist through and through. She has her own ideas, and she's bright and really quite brave, I think, in just setting out to do things that she thinks she'd like to do. And Sophia, I think, is a conscientious student, and she's been pretty active in school and in swim cadets and lacrosse, and has a lovely group of friends. So I think they're doing well as teenagers. Teen years terrify me these days. Oh, I guess they probably did when my girls were teens too. But,
Any other general thoughts on the way, like, things have sort of worked out? I mean, I know we're in the hopefully the brief age of Trump right now, but you see it as just an ebb and flow. I think that's what Obama's trying to tell people, that it's just part of the way things flow.
I have a hard time with it, but that's a good philosophy, and I think he's probably right. If you delve into history, there have been ebbs and flows all throughout the history of this nation, but things are a little rocky right now, I think. I worry about the rising cost of living and the disparity. Yeah, I do. I worry about too many people being left behind. And I'm sorry I'm so emotional.
That's what I was gonna say. Is worrying is you worry about worrying too much?
Oh yeah, I do, and I got it honestly from my grandmother Murray.
Okay.
Yeah, it gets worse the older I get, I think.
Any sort of other advice? I mean, you want to offer any advice about if we're looking at this 25 years from now? Is there any?
Oh, I wish I had words of wisdom
for us. Any other major topics you think that we?
No, I didn't hear everything you guys.
We did all the childhood. We did it all pretty much in order.
That's important stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know. You're the one, Adam, that's running a business. You should know all the questions.
I mean, every person's different. You're a resource.
But if you don't know a person, then.
I mean, I can interview someone and find out their life story with not knowing them, but I think that's great.
Words of wisdom. One thing is I regret that people are falling away from the church. I also regret that Christianity has such an ugly face in many aspects. Narrow-minded and unintelligent, I think. But for me, I wouldn't say I'm a deeply religious person, but it's been a kind of a support foundation for me. And I'm grateful. And I'm glad I'm glad that Forest Hill and John have been there for you guys too.
He's a great man, for sure.
You're
Yeah,
gonna have to delete half of
that's
this.
fine. I think, I know, John. It's a battle with to keep people engaged and to keep membership and stuff. But I think that John is, I mean, he's so relevant and so important to the community. You know.
There aren't enough Johns to go around.
No, it's true. No, it's absolutely true.
Mm.
No questions, Caroline?
No? Any questions?
Thank you for sitting for
Oh,